Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Thakur, Bhakti Noda Prabhu, Charane Poriya. Thakur, Bhakti Vinoda. Thakur, Bhakti Vinoda Prabhu, Charane Poriya. Almost there, a little more. Thakur, Bhakti Vinoda Prabhu, Charane Poriya. Close. She Harinama Mantra Loilo Magiya. Bhaktivinoda Thakur fell at the reddish lotus feet of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He begged for the Maha Mantra and he received it. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Haribol. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Get ready. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Tintal. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Haribol. Tintal. 1, 2, 3. Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Haribol. Nam Bhajan. Hare Rama, Rama Rama. Hey, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Govinda Jai Jai Gopala Jai. Jai Jai Gopala Jai Jai. Radha Ramana Hari Govinda Jai Jaya. Radha Ramana Hari Govinda Jai Jaya. Govinda Jai Jai Gopala Jai Jai. Govinda Jai Jai Gopala Jai Jai. Radha Ramana Hari Govinda Jai Jaya. Radha Ramana Hari Govinda Jai Jaya. Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol. Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur. Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol. Nitai Gaur Premanande. Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki. Shri Harinam Mahamantra ki. Shri Harinam Prabhu ki. Go Premanande. Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Privajagacharya Stotarishta Shishiman Abhay Charanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada ki. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Privajagacharya Stotarishta Shishiman Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj ki Jai. Anantakoti Vaishnavrinda ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shamakund Radhakund Giri Govardhan ki. Shri Vrindavan Tham ki. Shri Mayapur Navadip Tham ki. Shri Jagannath Puri Tham ki. Tulsi Devi Bhakti Devi ki. Jamuna Devi Ganga Devi ki. Sambeta Bhakta Vrinda ki. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. Go Premanande Haribo.
table and I'm going in much too fast. Like a young man.
What are you, 30 years old?
I just know which side my bread is buttered on.
We go always on this one, right?
Yeah.
It's perfect. So maybe here, I'll sit here.
It's needed to keep it with
Yes. Thank you, Rajesh.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
It's cool this morning. Hare Krishna. So today's class, following the format we've been using the last few days, has been designed around a particular topic, which we'll introduce in a couple of minutes. It's succession, in brief, the idea of facilitating and creating a culture of passing on responsibility for our society through generation to generation and expanding our movement that way. So that's going to be our topic, and we have a Bhagavatam verse that was selected for that purpose. So we'll start as we always do with Jai Radha Madhava. I'm seated next to His Grace Tamohara Prabhu, who's one of the senior most Prabhupada disciples in our movement, who is a GBC member, former director of the Child Protection Office for 6 years. Very difficult task. He did an excellent job. And he also has a PhD in educational psychology, which basically explains why he's up here, to keep an eye on me, to make sure that I don't get off too far. That's why he's here. And my name is Anuttama dasa. I'm the Director of Communications, and honored to be here in Chicago with all the Vaishnavas. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Balava Giravare Rani Gopi Jana Balava Giravare Rani Jashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Chiravanachari Yamuna Chiravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari Gopi Jana Balava Girivardhani Gopi Jana Balava Girivardhani Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yasoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jayarata Madhava Kunjabihari Jayarata Madhava Kunjabihari Jayom Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivirajikacharya Asto Tarasada Shishiman His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Jayom Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivirajikacharya Asto Tarasada Shishiman His Divine Grace Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnavarind Ki Jai Shri Shri Kishore Kishore Ki Jai, Shri Jagannath, Shri Baladev, Shri Mati Subhadra Ki Jai, Shri Shri Gaurnitai Ki Jai, Vaishnav Sangha Ki Jai, Book Distribution Ki Jai, Gaur Premanandi. All glories to the Sum devotees, all glories to the Sum devotees, all glories to the Sum devotees, all glories, Shri Shri Guru and Garanga, Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Vishwadaya Krishna Sakvade Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane Namaste Sarasvati Gauravani Pacharni Nirvishesha Shunya Vade Paskachade Sitarde. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much for having us. Anuttama Prabhu gave a very nice and probably over-exaggerated introduction for myself. He didn't say too much about himself, except that he was the communication director of Iskcon, which of course he is. He's also a GBC member, has been for many years. Been very involved in leadership in North America and internationally. He served as our international GBC chair, our North American chair, and he's been a real leader in the leadership movement. He's taught courses and conducted and actually developed seminars in leadership, and very, very prominent. Both of us have been on the GBC Strategic Planning Succession Committee for several years. And so this is an area that we were sort of assigned this by Rompad Swami. He gave us this topic, the art and culture of leadership succession. So we're trying to see what we can do with that particular topic. But it is somewhat fitting in that we have had some years of experience in that area and done some work in it. The concept of leadership succession may sound like some kind of new managerial technique, but it's not. This is part of a core principle of spiritual life. How is it? Well, we will see from some verses from Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. So as this is Srimad Bhagavatam class, we will start with Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 1, Verse 21. And this is a prose verse. It's not really written in the normal verse style, so I'll just read it. Shri Shuguvacha Atisamabhito Mahabhagavato Bhagavatas Tri Bhuvana Gurur Anushashanam Atmano Lagutav Yavananta Shiradaro Badhamati Sabuha Manamuvaha. Sri Shukadeva Goswami continued, after thus being instructed by Lord Brahma, who is the spiritual master of the three worlds, Priyavrata, his own position being inferior, offered obeisances, accepted the order, and carried it out with great respect. Srila Prabhupada's purport, Sri Priyavrata was the grandson of Lord Brahma, therefore according to social etiquette, his position was inferior. It is the duty of the inferior to carry out the order of the superior with great respect. Priyavrata therefore immediately said, yes, sir, I shall carry out your order. Priyavrata is described as Mahabhagavat, a great devotee. The duty of a great devotee is to carry out the order of the spiritual master or the spiritual master of the spiritual master in the parampara system. It's described in Bhagavad Gita 4.2, Evam parampara praptam. One has to receive the instructions of the Supreme Lord through the disciplic chain of spiritual masters. A devotee of the Lord always considers himself a servant of the servant of the servant of the Lord. And of course, the Bhagavad Gita verse that's being referred to, Bhagavad Gita 4.2, we should read, Evam parampara prapta bimam rajarshayo vidhu sakala nena mahata yoga nashta parantapa. The supreme science was thus received through the chain of disciplic succession, and the saintly kings understood it in that way. But in the course of time, the succession was broken, and therefore the science as it appears to be lost. So we can understand that the original leadership succession program or succession plan is spelled out thousands of years ago in the Vedic literatures, in the Srimad Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita, and that's the parampara system. One spiritual master would train his disciples. Those disciples then would become spiritual masters, and it went on that way. And so we're so fortunate to be in this Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya, an unbroken chain of disciplic succession for over 5,000 years. One spiritual master to another, coming down through Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the 6 Goswamis, then to Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj, and to His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. And then Srila Prabhupada has given spiritual knowledge to us that we can also continue in this line. So this is, of course, a spiritual disciplic succession, a spiritual leadership succession plan. We can see that this is actually a foundational principle of spiritual life. You know, not that it's just haphazard, people just spring up, somebody says, oh, I'm a spiritual leader now. No, a spiritual leader is trained by his spiritual master, carefully trained by the spiritual master, and then becomes qualified to continue in that spiritual leadership position. Now, of course, we also saw on more the managerial side, in the Vedic system, we had a system of great saintly kings. We had the Rajarshis who would pass on their power of administration. Usually it was dynastic, to their sons, from generation to generation. But it wasn't just that, somebody just took power or overthrew the government by some junta or something like that. It was very systematic. We have so many stories in our literatures, in Bhagavatam, Mahabharata, and like that, of how, think of the Pandavas, how they were trained by teachers, by Dronacharya, by Bhishma, right? There was, so many examples of how they were taught, not just in military arts, but in all kinds of arts. Think of Lord Ramachandra, how he was taught by his spiritual masters, and he was taught, of course, by his father and by, so many advisors and experts on all aspects of life, on all aspects of management, of leadership, of how to actually be prepared to take the position of king when it became his time to do so. So this idea of leadership, both from the spiritual lines and through the administrative lines, is a very organized system, and a system that involves very careful training of the next generation of leaders. So we can see that our ideas of succession planning or leadership training are not some new managerial technique, although we can always take advantage of any techniques that are there, but they are really foundational core principles of spiritual life. So Srila Prabhupada took these core principles and he applied them to an organizational setting. Now, Srila Prabhupada, in one sense, was a little unique in that he formed an organization to spread Krishna consciousness. But on the other hand, he was also following the example of the predecessor acharyas. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj, of course, formed the Gaudiya Math. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was very much involved in organizing Namahatas, systematic ways of propagating the Krishna consciousness movement. So Srila Prabhupada took those examples and those instructions from his guru, and he actually enacted them in a very, very grand way. Srila Prabhupada was the consummate organizational person. He was an expert strategic planner. He did not do things haphazardly. It was not that Srila Prabhupada just thought one day, oh, let's do this, the next day, let's do that. Of course, he was divinely inspired by Krishna, of course. But part of that divine inspiration was using those organizational talents he had and his ability to envision the future. Wasn't it? Prabhupada always envisioning the future? Remember his business cards when he first had like nothing, what was he? Just had a little storefront and it says centers throughout the world, his business card. Because he was envisioning a future and planning for that future. And we saw how expertly and systematically he propagated that. I want to look at one letter of Srila Prabhupada's. And this was in 1969, a letter to Hamsaduta. So in the very early stages of our movement, he was already planning for this transfer of leadership. In this letter, he says, one who will pass this examination, he was talking about the Bhakti Shastra courses way back from the very beginning, will be awarded the title of Bhaktivedanta. I want that all my spiritual sons and daughters, interesting, sons and daughters, but that's not our class today, will inherit this title of Bhaktivedanta so that the family transcendental diploma will continue through the generations. Those possessing the title of Bhaktivedanta will be allowed to initiate disciples. Maybe by 1975, all my disciples will be allowed to initiate and increase the numbers of generations. That is my program. Of course, we weren't very qualified by 1975, so that didn't happen. But still, we can see how Prabhupada had a plan and a vision. Now, I want to talk about this a little bit, some of the elements of this plan that Srila Prabhupada gave to us. And I have to give due credit to His Holiness Bhaktivedanta Swami, who's also a member of our succession planning team on the GBC. And so some of these ideas are directly coming. He and I wrote the mandate for the succession planning committee, and I took a lot of his ideas because he's a very, very deep, thoughtful thinker in these areas. And so this was his analysis of that letter that I just read of Srila Prabhupada. He says the essential elements of Srila Prabhupada's plan are 1, examination to identify potential leaders, 2, a special title, Bhaktivedanta, as a result, giving the disciples the prospect for development and a concrete date for this to happen by 1975. In other words, it's not just like, oh, maybe someday. He had a time plan for this. And 3, handing over the position of a guru. In other words, succession planning implies the existence of 3 distinct but interdependent systems. They are a competency testing system, an individual development system, and a role handover system. So Srila Prabhupada stated very simply, but if you look into it and break it down, he gave a very clear roadmap for planned leadership succession. So, so we have this inspiration from Srila Prabhupada about how there should be assessment, how there should be planning, and how there should be a way for the next generation of devotees to move up into important positions of leadership. So he was, as I said, Srila Prabhupada was the original Iskcon strategic planner. Sometimes we have the strategic planning that we're doing, at the international level, and we have so many committees, and once in a while we get some opposition or a little bit of pushback from devotees. Say, what's all this strategic planning? What's all this organizing? Isn't that Maya? That's just mundane. That's something from the mundane business world. But I think people who say that don't really understand Srila Prabhupada. To be honest, I don't think they've looked into how, or were not there, or haven't experienced how Srila Prabhupada did things in such a strategic and organized way. He had goals, he had purposes, and he had processes that he planned out and thought out about how he was going to get to that goal, because he was so intent on serving the mission of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his spiritual master. Bhaktisiddhanta's order to him to go to the West and to spread Krishna consciousness throughout the world. He knew that can you imagine? He's been given this huge order. It's almost impossible, 70 years old. So, of course you had to have purity, you had to have inspiration, you had to have the blessing and the mandate given to you by the acharyas and by Lord Chaitanya. But he also had to carefully plan and organize how he was going to bring this about. So I want to give some examples of how Prabhupada was a strategic planner And this leads into how our leadership succession planning has to also be organized in that way and thoughtful and go by a particular plan. In Srila Prabhupada's 7 principles, 7 purposes of Iskcon, which is interesting, in 2016 we're celebrating the 50th anniversary, and in July of that year is the incorporation of Iskcon, and that's kind of like we're centering our 50th Golden Jubilee celebration. So when Prabhupada wrote whenever you form a corporation, you have to have, what is your purposes? What is this organization about? And so Prabhupada wrote these down, and I don't know the history, but he probably was fairly quickly. I doubt if he spent months and edited and all this. It's probably something he did but they're incredibly wonderful. They're like guidelines, for us, for our whole movement. We know what we need to do by these 7 purposes that Srila Prabhupada gave us. And the first one was to systematically propagate spiritual knowledge to society at large and to educate all people in the techniques of spiritual life in order to check the imbalance of values in life and to achieve real unity and peace in the world. You don't see too many corporate, statements of purpose like that. I mean, it's pretty incredible. I mean, it's so poetically written and so spiritually powerful. But systematically propagate. That's kind of what I'm focusing on this. It wasn't like, we'll go out and see what happens. No, systematically propagate. Second example, we all know this one, in Prabhupada's very last days when he called Giriraj Maharaj in and asked Giriraj Maharaj, do you think this movement will go on after I leave? And Giriraj Maharaj said, yes, Prabhupada, if we're very pure, if we're chanting, things, very nice ideas. And Prabhupada said, yes, but we need organization and intelligence. That's how this movement will go on. Those are Prabhupada's practically some of his final words in his last week. We need organization and intelligence to have this movement carry on. Another example, this is from actually my initiation letter. Sorry, I like to use this one. But Srila Prabhupada wrote to us when we got initiation, 72, so it would have been 73 when I got initiated. And Prabhupada often in his letters he would refer to something he was just doing, his own preaching activity. And he was talking to some professor. And he said, this professor was saying the real problems of life are things like peace and the environment and pollution and world hunger and things like that. And he says, no, I told him that the real problems of life are lack of spiritual knowledge. And so that's how he started. And then he addressed us. I think there were 3 of us getting initiated. And he said, so you are all intelligent boys and girls. He was very kind. Therefore, my request to you is that you study the science of Krishna consciousness and solve all the problems of the world. That's all I had to do. By systematic propaganda as far as you are able to do it. So it took me many years, I think, to thoroughly understand that. I kind of got the idea. I was doing book distribution at the time, so I thought, okay, I'm fulfilling Prabhupada's desires at the time. I did a little book distribution by the grace of Vaisheshika Prabhu, who trained me up in the airport in Washington National. Did you think? No. No, Vaisheshika was like expert. He was about 16 years old then, and he was already an expert book distributor. Anyway, at any rate, but this idea of systematic propaganda means, again, planned, thoughtful. That we're not just running around, doing anything, but but we have this process in place. And then one other thing I was just thinking, I had to give an address. Somehow they had me do this. I was addressing some of the different builders and landlords, mostly devotees, in Mayapur. And as you know, the Mayapur outside the temple is not a very well planned thing going on there. It's like they call it the slum out there. And anyway, I was talking to them, and I was trying to impress upon them the need for planning and the need for, in other words, that they should cooperate with Iskcon's strategic plan to try to do things nicely, more environmentally friendly, more green space, all that kind of thing. And so I was doing a little research in Prabhupada's letters about Mayapur way back. Prabhupada kept using words like strategic planning and master planning for the Mayapur city over and over. This was back in the early 70s. Prabhupada was using these words. We didn't just, we're not just making these up. Prabhupada used those very words: master planning, strategic planning, city planning, how to organize things nicely. So obviously when we're talking about this leadership succession, we're not just talking about parampara, one guru to another, but we're also talking about the management structure. Because Prabhupada did create an organization, he created a hierarchy, he created a structure, because he knew that was the way to most effectively spread Krishna consciousness, through the sustained, systematic, and planned effort, and having an organizational structure that supported that. So Prabhupada wanted this management structure to go on, and he himself gave the example of how to turn over the management structure to the next generation. All of us have heard how Prabhupada had these plans to turn over the management to the GBC so that he could write books. Prabhupada said this many times. One letter, this is to Amarendra in 1973, he said, "You were asking me to advise what should be your program, but now I'm wanting to leave these matters in the hands of my disciples. I have created GBC specifically for this purpose. If the elder disciples cannot manage things, then what is the future of the society?" Of course, we often couldn't manage things, and Prabhupada had to keep stepping in, and he wasn't able to become free of management just to write his books. But at any rate, this was his idea. He said, "My business now is to sit down and write my books. And I am requesting all of you please cooperate with me in this endeavor. So I think you can take advice from Rupanuga Maharaj, that was his GBC, as he is my authorized agent. So I'm sending your letter and a copy of this letter to him in this regard." So we can see that Srila Prabhupada was always concerned with systematically training new leaders, his disciples who would take over both the spiritual mantle of the parampara and also the leadership responsibilities of this movement. So that's kind of our starting point for leadership and succession planning. Anuttama is going to talk about the need for succession planning, culture of succession, some of the barriers and other topics like that. And then I'll come back with some practical steps and applications we're doing. So, Anuttama.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Tamohara Prabhu. That was well spoken. I feel like yesterday I could have sat and listened to Vaisheshika go on and on and on, and I could listen to Tamohara, but at the end of his computer list it says Anuttama talks now, so on his order I'll have to speak a little bit. I'm reminded of a story, so many wonderful stories of Srila Prabhupada illustrating these points, and Tamohara mentioned some, and references to his letters, etc. There's a bit of a humorous story when Prabhupada was in Vrindavan one year. There's one of his disciples who's a very loving and beloved disciple who's also a little on the eccentric side, if we can say that in a positive way. It's a positive word, eccentric, lovingly eccentric, who would like to greet Prabhupada as he would walk out of the Vrindavan temple in the morning by reciting various Vedic verses to glorification of the Lord and his pure devotee, etc. And Prabhupada came out one morning and walked by Vishal Prabhu's quotation, extolling these different quotes. And I'm not sure how many days he went past, but maybe it was the second day, maybe it was the third day, and Prabhupada stopped and said to him, and just paraphrasing, "Can't you do something practical?" So the next day, as I've heard the story, Vishal Prabhu got a broom and he was very enthusiastically mopping the floor in front of the area in front of the temple as you leave the temple. When Prabhupada came the next day, Prabhupada didn't say anything, so apparently he was more pleased to see that he was practically engaged. So in so many ways we have examples from our founder Acharya of the importance of being practical, and one of those aspects is looking at planning for the future, training leaders, empowering leaders, plans for succession of devotees coming along, because we have this expression that Lord Chaitanya's movement, this is the golden age of Kali Yuga. It's meant to carry on for 10,000 years. So far, I haven't seen a shred of evidence that any of Prabhupada's disciples are expected to physically survive through that period of time. It seems a pretty reasonable conclusion that time is ticking for all of us, as well as some of the senior-most devotees of the next generation in terms of initiation in the parampara. Those devotees are also getting older. So this idea of, passing things down, leadership success, it's an important thing. I was remembering this morning, Sridhar Maharaj, who was very active in trying to promote professional management and organization within our movement. Prabhupada's disciple, Sridhar Swami, he liked to quote, I'm not sure the reference, but he gave it often, that Prabhupada said, my movement is Indian, but my management system is American. So there's another example of Prabhupada didn't shy away from engaging material things and structures and systems to help push on his movement. So one question might come up, why is succession so important now? Why are we giving it importance when there wasn't as much emphasis on the past? And just a few points come to mind on that, and I'm looking up here watching the clock for how long the class is to go this morning, and we all know there's the ever-present force of time. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, time I am, and he's pushing all of us through this life and through many, many lives. So the time factor is there. Our current generation of leaders are aging and getting older. In one sense, it's good that so many of our leaders are older. I remember when I first moved in the Iskcon temple in Colorado, the brahmacharis ranged between 16 and 19, and the temple president was, I believe, the amazingly aged and wised, had achieved of 26 years. And I remember there was one devotee, he was a wonderful devotee, but he moved in the ashram as a brahmachari at 29. And we were so amazed how such an old guy could move in the ashram. And I remember he was a good book distributor. At the end of the day, he'd come back and take a hot shower because his elderly bones just needed that little bit of reprieve. And, we used to make fun of him because he was 29 and he was such an old guy. So, thank goodness by Krishna's grace we survived that era when the oldest people in the movement were 24, 25, or 26. And no offense to those of you that may be at that age now. I also went through that stage, so, I share some of the experience. But as Rabindra Sarup Prabhu likes to sometimes comment that in the early years of the movement, there was only one adult in the whole international society, and that was Srila Prabhupada. Sometimes we read Prabhupada talks about you boys and girls, or my boys and girls, but that was kind of the fact. Devotees were so young. And again, that was a wonderful testimony to the enthusiasm, the sincerity, some perhaps not mature, but an inspired Krishna consciousness of those earliest devotees. And at the same time, we are fortunate to now have older people. I think it was Jayadvaita Maharaj one time said one of the greatest disadvantages of the movement in the early years was we had no grandmothers. I think he's said to have coined that wise expression. So now we're fortunate we have very, senior people in age and middle-aged people and younger people, and we've kind of matured and grown to that stage. We've got all the way from 6 hours to 96. We heard yesterday Rose Forecash, who was a leader in the folk movement, Friends of Lord Krishna in Los Angeles, who was very instrumental in helping establish the reputation of the society and the acceptance of the society. She was the mother of a devotee and created a whole network of people to kind of counteract some of the cult scare stuff that was there in the 70s, etc. And we were told just yesterday, I'm not sure how long ago this happened, but just recently, I think we were told at the age of 96. She's 95 or 96, she just got initiated. So that's kind of a wonderful thing, someone at that age. And so we can see that whole spectrum of age is important. And at the same time, when you have older people in all positions, then there's a need. So our leaders now, they used to all be 20, then they were 30s, then they were in their 40s, then they were in their 50s, now they're in their 60s. And, time factors marching on. So it's a time to do this, to be thinking about this seriously. Secondly, in terms of passing the baton of knowledge, our generation did a lot of good things. We're pleased that Prabhupada engaged us in a lot of ways, and there's a lot of things we messed up. we made a lot of mistakes in our youthful enthusiasm and perhaps naivete or just errors that were made. And it shouldn't be that when there is a handing over of decision-making authority, that whoever went through the earlier phase of that just kind of seals the files, locks the books, maybe burns a few, and says, okay, now it's your turn, good luck. There really should be a passing the baton in terms of here's the things that we've learned, here's the things that we learned because they worked, here's the mistakes that were made, please don't make the same mistakes, etc. So the good and the bad and the ugly need to be understood and analyzed and passed along, both practically and spiritually and socially and individually, etc. So that's the second reason. Time factors there, and that it's important to pass on the baton of knowledge. A third reason succession is important all the time, but especially now, is the world is changing. You know, when Prabhupada came to the West, he adapted a lot of things. I don't think there's any written history or anything Prabhupada said. He planned on having women live in the ashrams. It was a situation he found, he adapted to it. Vaisheshika Prabhu told the story of how Prabhupada, when he sent Western devotees first back to India and they started chanting on the streets, people gave money, and he said, stop it. That means they think you're beggars. So he tried one thing and it didn't work at that time, so he stopped it. So he was adapting according to the time, as he said many times, Kalapata Desha, time, place, and circumstance. So we also need to ensure that new voices, new minds, new ideas, young people coming in who are more aware of the cultural environment, that their ideas are part of the process, the planning that goes on now, and integrated in that way. And also to ensure that people who have those new ideas that are in touch with the larger society as it's changing around us, that can be integrated now into our outreach and our management systems and our society. In a way, obviously, that's in line with our principles. We don't change the core principles, but we have to adapt according to time, place, and circumstance. So those are some reasons why this needs to be done. But we also shouldn't think that it just means, okay, the GBC members are getting older or a few temple presidents are getting older, so we have to just, change, pull a few pegs out and replace those few people. But as our leadership began to look at this issue more closely, we became aware of the need to actually create a culture of succession. And I give credit to Jai Krishna Prabhu, who is now the president of New Vrindavan, and who came to the movement with many years of professional experience as well as his personal aptitudes and the spiritual acumen that he's developed in the last few years, who was our committee chairman for several years and helped emphasize this point. There needs to be a culture of succession. And what that means in simple terms is it's not just how do we replace the GBC members, but how are we thinking to make sure that we have the best possible people washing the pots and cleaning the floors and organizing the brahmachari ashram and training in book distribution and overseeing the congregational development programs, etc. How do we create a culture where new people come to our society and they are also given opportunities of leadership in whatever capacity is appropriate at that time? And not that it's just, okay, we need to change a few positions, but what's our culture of bringing new people up and bringing new people in? And we can see Prabhupada, there's some references from him. He talked about the need to always provide new and fresh challenges to devotees. It's a similar concept when we're a culture of training, a culture of succession. You're providing new challenges. Someone's able to do something, then you see what's the next step for them. How can they progress? How can they advance? What's the next challenge for them? So a few things involved there. Just in general, that there needs to be a vision of growth. I remember the story when Prabhupada left New York City to go to California, and the devotees had kind of heard Prabhupada was talking about it, but they weren't really sure, and how was it possible? And obviously Krishna consciousness was a Lower East Side thing. They couldn't imagine him leaving, and he was our guru, and he's going to be with us all the time, physically present. That was kind of their thought. And how could he possibly go to San Francisco and deal with those uncultured people outside of the New York hippie movement? How could you possibly hang out with San Francisco hippies? You need to stay here in New York, because that's just the way it is, and that's the way it should be. But we all know Prabhupada had universal ideas of spreading Krishna consciousness. So in the same way, we have to have a vision of growth. The societies, today we've grown to perhaps 600 temples. Why 600? Are we supposed to stay there? Is it supposed to be just, one major temple in Chicago with a few outposts, or one major temple in Washington with a few outposts? There's, how many Christian churches are there? How many synagogues are there, etc.? Today we were doing some calculations trying to understand how many members of the society there are, and it's very difficult, but one of the things we're going to kind of use as a baseline for our Iskcon 50 information to the public is, conservatively, we're going to look at this a little more closely, but we think we probably have about 7 million people a year worship at our temples. We don't have membership defined. We talked about that yesterday. If you talk about initiated devotees, it's not at all reflective of the number of people where Krishna consciousness is a very big part of their lives. How many people come here on Janmashtami to worship Lord Krishna on the most holy day of the year? 2,500. Okay. No, in D.C. it's about 8,000. In Juhu Beach, I have to go back and confirm the number, but it's somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people. It's this phenomenal number of people to come over the 3-day celebration. So a huge number of people. So vision of growth. So some concepts that we want to see, and this shouldn't, again, just be something that GBC is doing. This should be the kind of thing that all of our temple presidents are thinking about in North America and around the world. Creating a culture where we look to new people that come to get involved in our movement, new devotees. What's their potential? Our vision is, here comes a new person. What's their potential? What skills do they have? What abilities do they bring with them? What enthusiasm do they express? I remember we had a concert pianist came to become a member of the Denver Temple about 40 years ago, and we were really struggling how to engage him. Because we all knew that the first thing you had to learn when you become a devotee is service and humility, and it all begins in the pot room. And here's a man whose profession is based on his hands, and we say to him, the path to Krishna consciousness is sticking your hands in that murky water that's got pots and maybe knives and whatever Bhakta so-and-so threw into the thing to get cleaned. And he said, I can't do it. And we didn't really know how to engage him, because I'm dramatizing a little bit, but I remember that was a challenge for him. We didn't really have a vision. Well, you're a concert pianist. Wow, that's a wonderful thing. How can we use that skill? How can you use that skill in spreading Krishna consciousness? So to have this vision, to identify the potential of devotees that come, to create an environment of training. It's been emphasized so many times. Prabhupada said we should train, the senior qualified people should train the next level, and we're establishing so many courses. So identify potential, train and mentor devotees accordingly. Have processes of ongoing assessment. They can be less formal or more formal. Identifying how is this individual doing. They've taken responsibility for washing pots. They're doing a great job. What's the next step? How do we train them to maybe take responsibility for cleaning the whole kitchen? Then how do we give them responsibility for maybe purchasing? How do we give them responsibility for overseeing some devotees? Different levels to encourage devotees to move forward in this way. And of course, empowering. Understanding, just like Prabhupada empowered so many devotees. He said, okay, you've come for such, devotees were there for short periods of time. Of course, we've standardized these things because we needed to, but even initiation, Prabhupada empowered devotees so quickly. Prabhupada would send devotees, as he did, to Japan and to Germany and so many places, sometimes by themselves. He told Roy Ram to start a magazine. Some of you have seen the interview with Professor Tom Hopkins, who said Roy Ram didn't know anything about other than a magazine, other than he'd read one sometimes in the past. But Prabhupada told him, go start one. So this mood of empowering. So this is some of the ideas about creating a culture of succession. It's not just something that needs to be done at the top. It's something that needs to go through our entire society. Talk about the barriers later. Back to you, Don. Okay.
Sure. I was going to talk a little bit about some of the practical applications and implementations of succession planning. And one thing our succession committee had done is, and Anuttama really went over it, so I'll just really quickly, is talking about the steps in succession. planning. First, identifying candidates, assessment of their capabilities, training programs, then process of deployment, and then evaluation and ongoing assessment. And Anuttama did discuss those to some degree. The training is something that we've been focusing on lately. I don't want to go into boring details of our structurally, but we kind of have expanded the succession committee to this SOA. We call it the Succession Organizational Development Committee, and the GBC Appointments Committee all sort of came together, and we're trying to really bring a strong focus on training, especially top leaders. Now, as Anuttama was saying, the culture of succession really should start from the bottom. It should start from the bottom and work through till people are trained all the way up through the organization. Unfortunately, we're sort of in this emergency situation where we have a lot of us that are 65 to 70 years old and getting sick or whatever, and we see that we really are a little bit short at the top level. So we're kind of, as an emergency push, we put a lot of emphasis on training some of those top leaders who can become zonal supervisors, zonal secretaries, and many of them, or some of them, becoming GBC members. So that's a little bit what our emphasis has been on lately. But I want to talk about a little more in general some of the ways that we've tried to apply these principles of succession. We've had a number of leadership courses. Of course, Anuttama Prabhu started the leadership training course how many years ago? Many years ago. 15? 15 years ago, he has these 4, 5, 6-day seminars that teach basic skills, and he's taught that to leaders, temple presidents, other temple managers and leaders throughout the world. We in North America a few years ago, we started a 12-week course for leaders, and it was very successful in terms of developing the curriculum and putting together a pretty good program. It was not so successful in that we didn't have a real big attendance. You know, it was hard to get a number of people to be able to sustain going through that program over time. And there's been other, India has a very strong program called Iskcon Leads. They started with about 300. I think they have about 80 people who've gone through that, you know, their leadership training program in India. Some of the other individual courses, I think, have been very valuable in developing this idea of succession, just as I was talking about earlier, how the principle of succession starts with this idea of parampara, and how we have this thousands of years old tradition of passing on spiritual information and spiritual leadership from one guru to the next, one expert to the disciple. So we have developed, and Anuttama has been very prominent in this, developed a guru training course and also a disciple course. And in the guru course, actually, those who are going to take on this very important service of initiating spiritual masters in our movement need to take this course, which talks about many of the principles and issues and problems, and also gives them peer association where they can just have a deeper realization of this great responsibility they're taking. And recently we've developed a disciple course. Any of you taken the disciple course here? No one's taken the disciple? A few people. Okay, good. Good. This is very important. This is going to be mandated very soon for initiation, by the way. So if you're not initiated yet and you haven't taken it, plan to take it, right? And it's actually a very, very valuable course. It's not just like, okay, we put up a hurdle here, some stumbling block, something that, to slow your process down. But the idea is that people coming into our movement need to understand the importance of taking initiation, how to identify a spiritual master, and also how to connect, how becoming part of the succession also connects with the International Society of Krishna Consciousness, and how we're all part of that and all working together as an organization. We may all have our individual gurus, but we are one society under the umbrella of Srila Prabhupada and his books, his leadership and instruction. So these are some of the important things that are being done. And most recently, we've developed this GBC Leadership College. It's actually operating now. We had our first course ran in March in the Govardhan Eco Village, the outside of Mumbai. And we had about 25, 30 people, devotees went through that. This particular course is focusing on this top-level leaders, people who are going to be, the new title we're using is zonal supervisors. They've been called zonal secretaries, regional secretaries, district, there's like all these different titles for people who are managing perhaps a few temples or a few projects under the GBC. So it's a very, very important position, and as we grow and expand, we're not going to just create more and more and more GBC members, so we have 100 people in the room, but these zonal supervisors are going to be the frontline managers who are going to be managing many temples. GBCs will also be doing that. But anyway, we realize it's very important that these devotees get this very, very intense and very professional training. In the past, our idea of management and leadership training was really on the job, and that's what most of us did. Most of us, somehow or another, we fell into some position, particularly when we were younger. There weren't a lot of qualified people around, and so anyone who had a little bit of ability kind of was grabbed and said, okay, you do this, or you be the temple president, or you manage this department of the BBT, or whatever it was. And somehow by Krishna's grace and Krishna's mercy, it worked to some degree, because there were some very wonderful devotees and competent people who came along. And Krishna sent them, and they were able to take many positions and do many wonderful things. And many devotees learned as they went along. But it's not really a good formula for long-term success. We want, as we're talking about, we need this culture of more systematic training. And as our world changes and our world becomes, as Anuttama was saying, we're facing greater and greater challenges. We need a higher degree of competence and professionalism and skill, both materially and spiritually, of our leaders. So our leadership training involves not just learning accounting, but actually how to become a leader, how to manage people, how to communicate, how to inspire and manage and organize devotees in this very, very critical mission to spread Krishna consciousness. And it also involves spiritual principles. So we're training these leaders in spiritual leadership, management principles, and also principles of self-management and self-leadership, which are very important. Understanding yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, how that you best operate. And this is very important, that we're able to really help develop these devotees. And our first feedback for our first course has been really, really enthusiastic. The devotees that went through this just were very excited about the program. They really appreciate it. It's fairly intense. There's two 2-week sessions that they do, one in February or March, and then one in October. They're in India right now. But then there's like 12 weeks of internet courses in between, also 6 weeks and 6 weeks. So they're also doing extra study on internet courses that we've set up. And then they do personal projects, because practical application is so important. If you only have theoretical knowledge and you're not able to apply that, to an actual situation or a management situation, it just remains theoretical. And, it doesn't have a whole lot of value, perhaps. But what they do is they do individual projects, because most of them are managers anyway, so they work with a mentor, they select a project, and they try to apply those theories and practices and skills that they've learned into an actual situation. And then, of course, they have ongoing feedback with other devotees, other peers in the program, and with their mentors. So and there's an assessment process throughout. So this is a more professional way that we've tried to develop this. And we've been very, very fortunate, because Gauranga Prabhu and his Chaupati team has been has spearheaded this project, and we have so many talented people in education, and also all the IT backup for the internet courses and like that. So due to the inspiration, of course, of many senior devotees and that very practical work that Gauranga Prabhu and his team have done, they really put together a really, really good course. I think our final topic that we're going to do, and then we'll have some time for questions and comments and discussion, is we wanted to talk a little bit about how does this apply to younger devotees, How do you all fit into this idea of succession planning? And then I think you were going to end a little bit more with how does this apply to older devotees? How do older devotees need to work into this culture of succession? So for the younger devotees, we have to realize that Iskcon, this International Society for Krishna Consciousness, is a manifestation of Srila Prabhupada's mission. Sometimes Prabhupada said, Iskcon is my body. I have not been able to find that quote in the database. I've heard it said many times, but if anyone actually knows where that is, give that to me sometime. But at any rate, and Prabhupada did say these temples are outposts of Vaikuntha. So we have an important mission in this society, in this organization. We are parts of a shared preaching mission. We have a mission that has been given to us by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to spread Krishna consciousness throughout the world. It has been handed down by our line of acharyas and very clearly enunciated by Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada gave his personal example of dedicating his life 100% to the spreading of this movement. So we don't need to really figure out exactly what is the greater mission. That's been given to us. But at the same time, we are all unique souls. We are all jivas. Each of us has a unique eternal position, a relationship with Krishna. And at the same time, we are in this material world, and we have these material bodies and minds, which also have different propensities and unique abilities. So each of us is an individual, both with our unique propensities and with our eternal spiritual identity. So while we have this shared mission that we all become part of as we become members of this International Society for Krishna Consciousness, we also have our own personal mission. I was talking with Shireshwar recently, and I haven't heard it or seen it, but apparently he does a seminar called The Mission Within the Mission. And that was very intriguing to me because I've always really liked that idea, and you've given classes on that concept before, that each of us has our own mission within the larger mission of Srila Prabhupada. In a very famous letter to Kurandar, December 1972, Prabhupada said, "This Krishna conscious movement is for training men to be independently thoughtful and competent in all types of department of knowledge and action." So each of us needs to be independently thoughtful to fulfill this mission. That means that we have a personal purpose. We have a personal purpose that is part of the greater purpose of this Krishna consciousness movement. So we need to figure out what that is. How do we fit into this? What can I give to Krishna, to Srila Prabhupada, that is going to help this movement of Krishna consciousness throughout the world? And that is going to be very individual and very unique for each one of us. But I think for all of us, it also means that we have a personal succession plan, or a personal training program or development plan. In other words, all of us should try to advance in some way. Not everybody needs to be a GBC or a temple president or a zonal secretary. No, this isn't required. Leaders also need followers. In other words, we need, but I would submit that we are all leaders in this Krishna conscious movement. Every single one of you is a leader. You are a leader because you have spiritual knowledge much greater than the average person as you walk out the door. You are a leader to so many people. If you're in a family, you're a leader to your children. You're a leader in your family. You're a leader perhaps at work. You're a leader in whatever you might do. You may have 2 or 3 people that are serving with you. Maybe you're a little senior to, and you're helping them along. You're giving a little guidance. So you are a leader. So I think we all need to think about and have a plan for how can I expand that? How can I expand my own sense of leadership, my own sense of purpose, of how I can help this Krishna conscious movement? And Srila Prabhupada pushed us to do that. You talked about your 26-year-old temple president. My first temple president was 21, and sometimes we suffered for that, for the youthfulness. But at the same time, I have to have such great respect for, the people who took on these great tasks. But it was often because Srila Prabhupada pushed us. He said, he wanted us to take on more and more. And his expectations were very high. People rise to the level of expectations, right? Isn't that a principle? They've actually done research on this, like in classrooms. They've done research where they've told a teacher that you actually have a gifted group of students. They're very, very high achievers, and they weren't. They were just average kids. And what happened? The teacher had this expectation, and they performed at this very high level because the teacher expected that from them, and they thought that was the expectation for me, and they tended to come up to that. So in the same way, we should be put as leaders, we should be giving those expectations to others, and we should also have high expectations for ourselves. We need to push our comfort level a little bit sometimes, and sometimes we need to take on more challenges and take on a little bit more to help spread this Krishna conscious movement. So I think that all of us, in closing, need a personal mission statement of what is our succession plan? What is my plan for the future? What are some of those elements? You don't necessarily have to write it down, but it's something to think about. What are some elements of a personal mission statement? First, what is your purpose? What will you do? What do you have? What talents do you have? In other words, how can you add value to Srila Prabhupada's movement? What is your purpose? And what needs do you need to address? What do you and then, so the next part is, how are you going to achieve this purpose? So do you need to improve in certain areas? Do you need to increase? Do you need to get training? Do you need to learn more things? Also, do you need to analyze which talents and skills do you have? What can you bring? If you've been washing pots for 6 months and you're actually a concert pianist, I don't know, maybe there's something else you could be doing, you could be thinking about. I don't know exactly, that's a little bit of a tough one, but, we all, and that's not to say that we should not be satisfied doing simple service. I'm not saying that, don't get me wrong on this, because you remember the famous story when the great scholar came to Bhaktisiddhanta and was joining his movement, and he said, where shall I start, in the library? He says, no, you can start in the stable and start, basically shoveling manure. In other words, we all need to do simple service and learn humility. And we all do the needful. Doing the needful is a very important principle in Krishna consciousness. Srila Prabhupada demonstrated that, when the young people were coming to 26 Second Avenue, he was cooking the prasadam, serving the prasadam, and washing the pots himself. And finally they caught on, oh, can I help you? Eventually. But Srila Prabhupada did the needful. So we all do the needful, and we accept whatever service we have as being glorious. At the same time, we should try to maximize our potentials, to do the most that we can for Krishna and Srila Prabhupada. So we need to figure out what talent, what skills we have, what can we bring to Krishna consciousness, and we also, it's also important along the line to think what values guide your service. In other words, am I thinking of my personal mission statement of how much money I can make, or what kind of position I can have, or how I can, or do I think of the values, even if we have some of those desires, still we have to also think about the greater values of spiritual life, of how I can advance in spiritual life, and how I can serve my guru, how I can serve Krishna. And if those all values and goals come together, then we can develop a plan. Now, how do we do this? First of all, seek mentoring, talk to senior devotees, talk to your authorities about your plans, about what you see yourself doing in Krishna consciousness. And maybe make a short-term or a long-term plan. Discuss your future. Discuss what you can bring. And also look for those opportunities of mentoring, of training. If there's some seminar being held and you think, oh, I don't know if I want to go to that or not, think maybe I should take that. Maybe I should take opportunities that are presented, to advance myself, advance my skills, so that I can have more to offer in service to Guru and Krishna. So I just encourage young people to not just be complacent, but also to be thinking about what you can do for Krishna, because it's unlimited. Krishna is unlimited, Krishna's devotional service is unlimited, and devotees' capacity for service is unlimited. So anyway, I just encourage everybody to advance as far as you can and offer your skills and your abilities and your talents to the service of this mission. Thank you.
Just a few more thoughts, then we'll open for questions. So Tamohara's emphasizing kind of what young devotees can do in terms of this culture of succession and taking on responsibilities. But two things, messages to older devotees. We also should be doing that. We also should be looking to see how can I get continued training, how can I take on continued responsibilities and continued challenges in Krishna's service. Again, Prabhupada said that's what keeps Krishna consciousness fresh. Again, the example of, I don't know her spiritual name yet, but Rose Forecastle at 95 or so said, yes, now I'm ready to take the next step and get initiated. So we salute her for enthusiasm. That's not an easy thing to do at 95 or 96 years of age. This desire for ongoing growth. I remember just last year I was able to arrange my schedule, and finally, after years of praying to Krishna, let me do it, I was able to take Iskcon's Teacher Training 2 course. I've been training seminars for years, but never had the second course. And I thought, I know there's some things I'm missing there. And I took the course, and I felt I was intellectually taking a bath. It was just so refreshing to learn new things and new skills, and it was just another whole aspect of my personality that was being nurtured through that. So it shouldn't be we get to a certain point and think, well, I know everything. You know, I've been a GBC or a temple president or brahmachari or brahmacharini or book distributor for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. What else can I learn? We should always have that mood of learning and taking on more. Also, as far as senior people in terms of the succession, it's really important that we all see the value of passing on the baton, bringing them up the next generation, creating this culture, because we can either be part of the solution or easily be the problem. You know, Bhadra Raj, sometimes he has these wonderful little humorous descriptions he gives, and he talks about it shouldn't be that authority is passed on to the next generation when they take the keys from the cold, dead hands of the older generation. It's kind of graphic image. That shouldn't be what it's all about. You know, I think he says, pry the keys from the hands of the previous. So we have to be particularly looking for opportunities to inspire, empower, and delegate the next generation. And it even, you know, if you're the senior book distributor, you can't be thinking the main thing is for me to make sure I'm always the biggest book distributor. That's not the main thing. The main thing is to be training the next generation of book distributors. And if you're washing pots, it shouldn't be like you keep the secret of where the best pot washing, scouring soap and scrubbing brush is because you want to maintain power of doing the best job for Krishna. That's a nice mood, but a better mood is how do I pass this on to others? That's more importantly. So how do we empower and delegate? It's a whole long discussion. Tamohara quoted that wonderful quote from the letter to Karandar, so I won't reread that. But some things are particularly required. First of all, as again, looking, kind of talking to the older folks, and then a brief message to the congregation, I'm open for questions. Humility. In order to really be enthused to empower and delegate responsibility and create a culture of succession, one has to have the understanding, I don't know it all, and I can't do it all, and I can't tell it all, and other people may know as well or better than me. And young people coming up, the new generation, whatever that means. If you're 30, that means they're 20. If you're 50, it may mean they're 40. That next generation, they also have wonderful things. I don't know it all. I have limitations. Let me inspire and empower others to come up. Second thing, faith. One has to have faith that actually other people have potential. Did Prabhupada have faith in the potential of his Western disciples? Unbelievable faith that Prabhupada had. Again, he said, you go to Germany, you go here, you go there, you start a magazine. I mean, they were kids. Malachi just walked in. I'm reading a little bit of Jamuna's book, and they were kids. And Prabhupada just empowered the devotees to do amazing things. So we have to have faith in the potential of others. And there has to be a mood of respect, partly respecting the differences. Will we ask or empower or enthuse someone else to take up responsibility? They're going to do it differently. We can't say, please do this. No, don't do that. You know, you have to go through this door, not that door. You have to start at 10:05, not 10:02. We have to be ready to empower people to figure those things out themselves. I had a friend of my father's who was a very big director. He was one of the executive vice presidents of Ford Motor Company. He was like number 3 or 4 in the company for many years. I saw him at a retirement party after I became a devotee years later. I thought, wow, I got 2 minutes with this guy who I knew when I was 5 years old, hadn't seen him forever, to ask his advice. His name was Robert Hampson. So I said, Mr. Hampson, tell me, with all of your decades of experience, what would be the one most important instruction you will give to managers and leaders? And he thought about it for about, a little bit of silence. And he said, I would say the most important thing, get the best possible people you can, give them clear guidelines and a goal of what's meant to be achieved, and get out of the way. That was his instructions. So again, we always are offering spiritual guidance and leadership and mentorship, but we have to make sure in this mood of succession that we don't, when we delegate, we have to respect other people's different way of doing things and having courage to allow people to take some risks. If you're the senior book distributor and you give some young devotee the best corner to distribute that day, it's a risk. The total number of books may go down short term, but the vision needs to be there that this will, in the long term, be a best benefit for them and for the overall, for me as the Sankirtan leader, and for the future growth of the movement. And then the last quality that's often identified as patience. It takes time for young people, newer people, to come up in their abilities to do particular tasks. So we have to be humble, see I'm limited, have faith in others' potentials, respect for the differences, some courage. Let's take a risk here. Prabhupada was very brave when he gave so much responsibility to his young disciples. And they made a lot of mistakes, and he had to fix a lot of mistakes. New York, as an example, pops in my mind when they were about to buy a temple and they gave all the money to that real estate person who was just a shyster and stole all the money, and Prabhupada had to get back involved and kind of, negotiate with this man to try to get the money back. So a little bit of courage. There are going to be mistakes made, and patience and vision. And then the last little bit of a message in terms of some of the barriers, why it doesn't happen. One thing is sometimes as leaders or as older people, we're a little afraid. Well, if I inspire this young man and this young woman to come up to take responsibility, what about me? I'm the communications director. If I try to get somebody else trained, maybe they'll do a better job than me. Maybe the GBC will say, well, here's your golden japa bag, and it's time to move on. But we can't think like that. We're not this body, we're not this job, we're not this position, we're servants. And we should try to share everything we have as many people as possible, inspire them to come up and not be worried about our particular position. Krishna will take care of us. And if the movement's growing as it is, there's always other responsibilities we can take up. And the last possible barrier to this is, as we're empowering, encouraging young people, particularly in the reality of ours being primarily a congregational movement, many people are going to come up as grahastas, young couples, young families. They're going to need some more resources than we provided in the past for devotee leaders. And we should be prepared to provide for those. And a message for the congregation as a congregational member, because I know sometimes these lectures are broadcast and transcribed and people find them online and things like that. I think a very important message to members of our congregation is it's our duty as congregational members. Prabhupada said grahastas are supposed to provide the nourishment to the body, provide the strength. And that is speaking about our divine spiritual responsibility to provide financial support for the movement. It's one of those things that we have not matured properly. Our congregation, generous as many members are, they haven't fully understood the need to be the fuel in the fire. Now, if you're an ashram devotee in terms of a temple devotee, your responsibility in this context is to ensure that there's respect and enthusiasm for the congregation. They feel cared for. They want to provide more resources. But we need to be thinking about this in a serious way. Prabhupada many, many times said congregational devotees should be thinking about giving 50% of their income. Now, a lot of people think, oh my gosh, how could that possibly happen? Well, it's an ideal. It may be not something that everyone can do or can come up to right away, but at least some serious commitment, devotees should be thinking like that. Most communities, the Jewish community, the Christian community, the Islamic community, they all say 10%. So we should do that. Prabhupada said 50. I know from my own experience as devotee, there's kind of times of plenty and there's times of not. So I know sometimes in my life, I've always tried to give as a gross to at least 10%. Sometimes it was 75%. Sometimes it was less than that. But doing, whatever we can to maximize that. It's not a mundane thing. It needs to be done, and to move our movement forward. There's a barrier in succession that if the congregation we have doesn't step forward more in a systematic way, and we all need to inspire them, as speaking now as a temple person and as a leader, we need to inspire them to know this is the best investment they can make for their own spiritual advancement. That will help move things forward with succession as well. One barrier that needs to be overcome. So it's important for young devotees, it's important for older devotees, it's important for the culture that the succession is there. As Tamohara spoke, there's systems being put in place throughout the society, and we hope that all of us can be part of that solution, take advantage of the opportunities that are there for us to take on more responsibility and to step up, and wherever our status is in the organization, see our job also. If you're a 2-week devotee, part of our job is to encourage and inspire and bring up that person who came today. It's not that succession is just there for GBC members, or if you're 65, you should think about succession. If you've been here 2 days, you should think about succession. How do I inspire, train, encourage, and facilitate the devotee that comes today, who's only been here 1 day? Okay, so we'll stop there with some questions. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So we have about 10 minutes for questions.
Wait for the mic. Everybody use the microphone.
I have a humble request for the assembled devotees. In 10 minutes from now, His Grace Jatayu Prabhu, a devotee in our Cleveland Yatra, will be removed from life support system. And just ask your prayers that there's a real smooth transition. Thank you very much. Jatayu, formerly known as Jim Brown, initiated by Bhakti Marg Maharaj.
9 o'clock?
Pardon?
At 9 o'clock?
9 o'clock.
What time?
Yes, 9 o'clock here, 10 o'clock there.
So let's just pause, and we like to do this in Washington, D.C. Let's all 3 times say the Maha Mantra and pray to Krishna to protect this nice lifestyle.
One other thing, his wife's name is Bhaktin Renee. She's in recovery from breast cancer, so it's been a real rough year for the...
So can we all together 3 times say the Maha Mantra and pray the Lord to protect Jatayu Prabhu and his wife Renee? Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai Jatayu Prabhu Ki Jai. May Krishna protect him. Jai Sheshika Prabhu.
It's such excellent presentation from both sides. I could live off that for the next 5 years. I'll just have to go back and listen to it and get it transcribed or something. But thank you very much. It was just stunningly effective and beautiful. A couple quick things, because there may be some questions. But I had a couple of examples came to my mind of how Prabhupada gave this empowerment. And I was reading the BBT Trust Fund when I was reading my book, when Prabhupada first set it up. And I read this one section. He writes in the use of the trust fund, the trustees shall collect all proceeds from the sales of my books, that is 100%, of all the proceeds from the International Society for Krishna Conscious Temples, and divide these proceeds into 2 funds. One half, the fund known as the book fund, one half known as the building fund. Here it is. The proceeds allocated to the book fund shall be used for the following purposes, all in the discretion of the trustees, in whom I have complete confidence. He wrote that into the trust fund. Last night I was talking to Yashomati Nandan, our godbrother in Gujarat, on the phone, and he told me during one part of the conversation that one time when he asked Prabhupada, how we go on after you've left, how can we take up where you've left off, and he said, child will be the father of man. And so he was saying that, you'll have to come up, you have to grow up. I have a lot more to say.
Thank you. Nice.
Thank you both very much. One question that comes up in terms of the temple management is when someone is in a leadership position, they tend to give advice based on the benefit of their project. And that's only natural because one's looking for the progression of that particular project. So then sometimes I've heard from some devotees that they feel compromised, that I want to, as a Vaishnava or a Brahmin, to give advice objectively, what's best for this individual. But because I'm in a managerial position, a lot of times that can affect the advice that I'm giving, rather than perhaps thinking what's in their ultimate best interest. It can be more of, how does that relate to what I'm trying to do here? So I was just wondering if that comes up, or some thoughts you might share on that particular circumstance.
As I understand it, you're saying that sometimes there's a conflict amongst managers and leaders when they're advising people who are serving under them in terms of what's in the best interest of that person and what's in the organizational interests, perhaps, of the temple. That's more or less your question.
And I heard particularly from the senior devotee who's mentioned this issue, that as a Brahmin, that their advice should be I don't know the right word I'm thinking of, but...
I understand.
Yes, thank you.
This is an inherent conflict that we all experience. It's fairly natural because both interests are legitimate. It's not that one is important and the other is not important. Temple leaders do need to keep the temple going. They need to, do their work and do what's necessary in trying to best organize people. At the same time, they have to be very conscious of the needs and interests of those under them. And that's a real skill, that's a real art of leadership. What we ideally try to do is serve both to the best you can. In other words, how can you best match the needs of the devotee and the needs of the organization? And it doesn't always work easily. Sometimes we have devotees that come and say, I want to do this, this, and this. It's just not really something that we can facilitate, or that it's really... So sometimes you have to try to help direct them maybe in another way or something similar. And so it is kind of a balance. But I think that the point you're making is that leaders need to be very conscious of that we don't... Because sometimes the stresses of management get to where you can start seeing devotees as they're a problem or they're not a problem, or there's something, no, devotees are devotees and they need to be engaged, they need to be inspired. You can't think of just as a problem for me, and so anyway, it's a very good point, and it's a very good, it's a cautionary thing that leaders need to always be conscious of. You probably teach this in your leadership class.
Yeah, there's a drawing that we use in the leadership and management course. Again, a little dramatized with two styles of management. One person is sitting on the top of the Egyptian pyramid, yelling through their megaphone, do this, do this, do this. I don't think they show a whip being cracked, but the idea is kind of there. And the other one is someone who's watering flowers and letting the flowers come up. So, and there's another, I knew one person at Malati often has come and speak at some of our events in New Vrindavan, talks about a servant leader, really emphasizing that leader, it's not that there's a top-down structure, the leader's in charge and everybody follows in line, but the leader themselves should see that I'm at the bottom and I'm the servant of everyone above me. At the same time, Prabhupada created an institution. Prabhupada didn't just say, okay, everybody chant Hare Krishna and sit under a tree. He said, he created the temples, he created deity worship, he created the BBT, he did so many institutional things because he saw the need to cooperate. And as we talked about, he saw the need for structure, systematic propagation. So both have to be there. So I think Tamohara hit the key word, which is balance. There are individuals who tend to lead from the point of view that I'm in charge, fall in line. And I know what's best for the mission, full stop, period. That's not a very good style of management. At the same time, there are individuals that think, okay, I'm a Brahmin, or we're supposed to be Brahmins, which means we're independently thoughtful, which means we're independent, which means there's no authority, and I have to do what's best for me. Well, that's the materialistic mentality. that's what keeps us in the material world. So how do we balance those of knowing my needs are important, the needs of the individuals I'm caring for are important, but how do we address those in such a way to also do what's best for the community? And that can be done. I mean, that's a whole leadership training thing and a question of consciousness, but it shouldn't be one or the other. No, I don't, I can't help with Janmashtami Prabhu because I'm too busy being Krishna conscious. Or Prabhu, there's no time to eat on Janmashtami because you just have to serve. And when I was your age, we didn't sleep and we used to go on book distribution. We carried our books 19 miles to the airport, so there's no reason you can't, climb up 18 flights of stairs with not a glass of water 18 hours a day, or etc. It doesn't have to be such extremes. You can do both. And that should be what we try to do. And that's our duty. As even in the Guru seminar, the discussion, how can gurus who primarily their service is to care for the individual spiritual life, they have to balance that. Sometimes the temple manager has to look for the overall needs of the community. And how does the temple manager is looking for the overall needs of the community also has to balance the needs for looking for the care of the individual devotees. Both have to be there and can be there. Prabhupada did it. Prabhupada pushed. But first and foremost, he was concerned about the progress of the individual devotee. And he said the first thing is to save yourself. And then he told us go out and double book distribution every year, which you don't do that sitting and sleeping. So both can be there and have to be there.
Just as a final thing, I think it's an important topic. We spent a little time with it. I think one of the keys is just communication. If you're having if there are these issues, talk to your authorities. Just talk to them. Work it out. Keep communicating.
And Brajavihari Prabhu just walked in to remind us that as a mature and maturing organization, we're putting structures in place like Iskcon Resolve and mediation. So if there are issues, if I'm as a GBC or I used to be temple president or department head, if Anuttama is doing something that's not individuals working under me feel there's issues and they can't communicate properly with me, well, there's channels they can go through. There's a temple president above me, or there's a GBC above them, and there's Iskcon Resolve, and you can deal with things even in confidential ways. And there's not time. Braj, I think you gave a presentation last night about some of these things that Iskcon Resolve does, and those are other tools that are there, because we are human beings. I try to communicate and care for devotees, but I make a lot of mistakes. I step on people's toes. So one, I have to be open to be corrected and to do better. And two, I have to be reminded the importance of caring for the individuals, and also stressing the need of our society to push Krishna consciousness in a big way. And we have wonderful systems such as Iskcon Resolve that's there to help us address when issues come up. I mean, there's a Grahasta Vision team that's there now. For what purpose? To help within marriages, to help couples. Okay, she's a nice devotee, he's a nice devotee, just chanting Hare Krishna, everything will be fine. Well, no. It takes some training, it takes some structure, it takes some support, counseling, etc. So we're very fortunate to live in this time in Krishna consciousness where all these wonderful support mechanisms and communities are coming up. Yep.
Was there anyone have a question? Brajabihari Prabhu? This will probably be it. We'll have to end class.
I just thought it'd be a nice way to start to end the class with a little story, and it's really kind of a glorification of Badri Narayan Maharaj. When I was, I'll try to make it really quick, he had arranged for me to start associating with my wife, and we weren't married yet. And then I had gone to Vrindavan and attended the Vrindavan Institute for Higher Education and really got a big boost out of that, and I had decided actually I want to move to Vrindavan and serve there. So I went up to Maharaj and said, listen, I would like to marry this person, but really my first priority is I'm going to go to Vrindavan, and if you allow her to go with me, that's, and it was hard for her because she was the #1 book distributor there, the #1 collector, and she was in charge of the Gurukul in San Diego. But, he had that vision that, Prabhupada said, think of the world first and your zone second, and he could see that, her helping out with the Vrindavan Gurukul would have been a big boost, and he unhesitantly, in those days, very rare, and he said, well, what's best for her? Of course, I don't know if it was best for her marrying me. That might have been a bit of a stretch. But it was just a good example of kind of relating to the question that was asked.
Great. Thank you. Very nice example. Thank you all very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. And as Malati reminded us, those of us that are here in Chicago, let's again think of Jatayu Prabhu, who is leaving this world physically at this time, and pray to Krishna to protect him and bring him back to him.
I was listening on
On the computer. Should have said scannersoil.org.
Where do you, are these classes all somewhere preserved?
Yes, Iskcon Chicago.